Welcome to Intelligent Investor Insights with Joshua Barone, your host and guide through the noise of today's markets. Here, we interpret the data behind the headlines, break down what's driving the economy and interest rates, and help serious investors make decisions rooted in clarity, not emotion. If you're looking for disciplined, research-driven insight to strengthen your portfolio, you're in the right place.
So my dad, Dr. Robert Barone, he used to write these economics columns for Forbes. And one afternoon, I must have been, 24, 25, fresh-faced and thinking I knew everything about the investment world because I had a shiny new calculator and a stack of financial journals. I made the mistake of telling him that once a family puts their money into a corporate trust, the hard part is over. I said, "Dad, it's institutional, it's safe." He just stared at me over his reading glasses and said, "Josh, a vault is only as secure as the person holding the keys. And right now, you're assuming the key holder doesn't have a side deal with the locksmith." It took me building a trust company from the ground up right here in Reno to realize just how right the old man was. We have this collective hallucination in this business that putting a legacy into a trust with a massive household name bank means it's wrapped in some kind of bulletproof ethical force field. It's not. The reality of modern wealth transfer is that the legal structures we set up to protect families are often the very tools used to quietly, legally, systematically bleed them dry. Let's strip away the polished marketing brochures for a second and look at the actual chessboard. You have two main players here. First, you've got the corporate trustee. That's the big institution. They handle the day-to-day administration, they cut the checks, they deal with the taxes, and they manage the investment portfolio. On the other side of the ledger, you have the trust protector. This is the watchdog. In theory, the protector is the family's champion, the person with the power to fire the trustee, change the jurisdiction, or modify the trust if the laws change. It sounds like a perfect system of checks and balances, right? But in the real world, the friction between these two is massive. It's a legal minefield. The corporate trustee wants to protect its fee stream and limit its liability. So they write agreements that make the protector's job nearly impossible. They design these systems so that the protector is essentially wearing a legal straitjacket, terrified of getting sued if they actually step in and protect. It's a recipe for paralysis. And this paralysis is where the real danger lives. It's not in blatant headline-grabbing embezzlement. No, that's amateur hour. The real threat is what I call gray practice. This is the architecture of fiduciary failure. Gray practice is the universe of actions that are 100% legal on paper. They'll pass an audit by the OCC or a state regulator with flying colors, but they completely, utterly violate the actual spirit of fiduciary loyalty. It's the technical compliance that masks economic extraction. I call it underwriting for the financial apocalypse. But instead of protecting the client from the market, the institution is protecting its own margins from the client. They're buying $1 of service and charging the trust 50 cents of value, keeping the rest for themselves. And because it's buried in 50 pages of legalese and complex accounting, the family has absolutely no idea they're being taken for a ride. It's the ultimate quiet heist. So how does this actually work in practice? Let's look at the mechanics, the specific levers these institutions pull. There are 5 main patterns of gray practice that I've seen play out over and over again. The first one is the classic, proprietary product preference. This is where the bank or trust company, acting as trustee, stuffs the trust portfolio full of their own in-house mutual funds, structured notes, or alternative investments. They'll tell the beneficiary, "Oh, we have world-class managers right here." What they don't say is that those internal funds carry an extra layer of management fees that flow directly to the bank's bottom line. It's a double dip. They're charging a fee to administer the trust, and then they're charging fees inside the investments they chose for the trust. It's a massive conflict of interest. But because the trust document has a tiny boilerplate clause waiving the conflict, it's perfectly legal. The second phase is the passive trust protector non-intervention. This is where the protector, who should be sounding the alarm on these in-house funds, just sits on their hands. Why? Because they're usually a family friend or a professional who doesn't want to rock the boat. Or they're relying on the corporate trustee's legal team to tell them what they can and can't do. They become a rubber stamp, giving a false sense of security while the fee extraction continues unabated. Then you get into the really subtle stuff. Take discretionary distribution timing. Say a beneficiary needs a distribution to buy a house or start a business. The trustee has the discretion to approve or deny it. But remember, the trustee's fee is usually a percentage of the assets under management. If they distribute $500,000 out of the trust, the assets under management go down, and so does the trustee's fee. So what do? They drag their feet. They request more paperwork. They schedule committee reviews. They stall. Every month they delay is another month they collect fees on that $500,000. They're timing distributions not based on the beneficiary's needs, but to extend their own fee horizons. It's incredibly dirty, and it's almost impossible to prove in a court of law because discretion is a legal shield. And then there's cross-institutional lending. This is where a bank trustee encourages a beneficiary to take out a loan against the trust assets rather than taking a distribution. They say, don't liquidate the investments, keep the compounding going, just borrow from our lending division at a competitive rate. Think about that. The bank is keeping the trust assets whole so they can collect their advisory fee, and at the same time, they're earning interest on the loan they just gave you. They win on both sides of the ledger while you pay double. It's brilliant and it's absolutely predatory. And how do they hide all of this? The fifth pattern. Reporting information asymmetry. If you've ever looked at a standard corporate trust statement, it looks like it was generated by a mainframe computer from 1983. It is deliberately opaque. They use non-standardized trust accounting that mixes principal and income in ways that make it impossible to calculate your actual net of fee performance. They'll show you gross returns, or they'll hide the internal fees of their proprietary funds deep in a prospectus you'll never read. They create a smoke screen of data that tells you absolutely nothing about the actual fee drag or whether your wealth is actually growing or just being eroded by 1,000 small cuts. It's an information asymmetry designed to keep you quiet, passive, and paying. You can't manage what you can't see, and they know that. Now, you might think, well, Josh, isn't there a regulator for this? What about the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency or the state banking departments? Let me tell you something from someone who has sat in those regulatory meetings. The regulators cannot protect you from gray practice. They are built to check boxes. They want to make sure the trust company isn't violating the letter of the law, that the paperwork is filed, and that the bank isn't going insolvent. They do not look at the spirit of the fiduciary duty. Furthermore, trust instruments are private contracts. Unlike public companies or even standard investment accounts, there is no public disclosure. The regulators don't have the time, the resources, or the mandate to dissect a private trust's fee structure to see if a family is being nickel and dimed by proprietary funds or delayed distributions. The oversight is completely fragmented, and the privacy of the trust, which is supposed to protect the family from the public, ends up protecting the trustee from scrutiny. So what do? If you're a family looking at this, you have to dismantle the gray zone yourself. You have to move from passive trust structures to affirmative, aggressive transparency. First, you need independent fee benchmarking. You don't ask the trustee if their fees are reasonable. Of course, they'll say yes. You hire an outside third-party firm to run a diagnostic on every single basis point leaving that trust, including the hidden internal fund fees. Second, you have to give your trust protector real sharp teeth. You write the trust document so that the protector has the unilateral, uninhibited power to remove the trustee without cause, and you indemnify them so they aren't terrified of their own shadow. You turn them from a passive rubber stamp into a true, active sentinel. Look, at the end of the day, my philosophy is pretty simple. It's the same thing I learned from my dad and the same thing that guided me when we built our own trust company. Trust assets are not piggy banks for corporate institutions. They are the accumulated hard work, sacrifice, and discipline of a family, engineered to last for generations. If you're going to buy $1 of fiduciary service, you better make sure you're getting $1's worth of value, not 50 cents of service and 50 cents of corporate overhead. Discipline in this game is non-negotiable. You have to underwrite for the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is letting your legacy get quietly eaten alive by the very people you hired to protect it. Demand absolute raw transparency. If a trustee can't explain their fees or their investment choices to you while standing on one foot, it's time to fire them. Don't let the corporate machine turn your legacy into their quarterly earnings beat. All right, that's enough preaching for one day. Talk soon.
Thanks for joining Joshua on Intelligent Investor Insights. If today's discussion raised questions about your portfolio strategy, risk exposure, or how to navigate this late cycle environment, we invite you to connect with us. We work directly with investors who want data-driven guidance, institutional level analysis, and a partner in building durable wealth. Reach out to start the conversation and take the next step toward becoming a more informed, confident, and resilient investor. Until next time, stay rational, stay disciplined, and invest with intelligence.